Hi, I'm Alexander Maxim from Ethiopian IO. Today we will continue our series about PHP. In this tutorial, we will learn the output buffering or output buffer when the developer triggers a display in PHP using echo, print, printf, printr, etc. The thing we will display or print will not be displayed directly. It's actually stored in batteries called buffer that the developer can easily control them. The data will be displayed from the buffer once it's emptied. We will talk about the buffer, the layers, how to control them, and the effects on our code or our display. Firstly, what's the output buffering or output buffer? The output buffer, or called also output buffering, buffers everything that goes to the display. This layer is configurable via the output buffering parameter of PHP ini. This parameter can take the values on, of, or an integer representing the size of the buffer in bytes. If on is chosen, the size of 40 kilobytes is used. If the value is off, all the data will be transmitted to the SAPI. The SAPI is a buffer under the PHP buffer. When PHP empties its buffer, it empties it in the SAPI, which also has a buffer whose size not configurable via PHP. This buffer can hold the database displaying it. It's possible to ask the SAPI layer to empty its buffer. This is done in several ways in PHP. After that, we have the function ob_start. What's the function ob_start? This function starts the output buffer. As long as it's triggered, no data is sent to the browser but temporarily buffered. Output buffers are staked. You can call ob_start multiple times at the same time. Make sure that you can call ob and flush often enough. If multiple callback functions are active, the contents will be filtered sequentially in the order of nesting. This function returns true on success or false on error. Let's see how it works. So we have a PHP file. I will use echo to print the value of the key username in the array $_session in the browser. But firstly, I will use ob_start. The ob_start will open the log of the output buffer and change its boolean value to on. So the output buffer now is opened. We can store all the values from the echo, print, printf, etc. functions in this output buffer. So we will store username, for example, here in 8 bytes or 8 octets, etc. So we have 8 octets for the user name. After that, we will continue our code by printing welcome, how are you, and we will also get the value of the username key in the $_session, and this is the result in the browser. So we will print welcome, how are you username. So the ob_start will open the log of the output buffer, will change the value to on of this output buffer to stock or to store all the values that we want to display in the browser. After that, we have the ob and clean function. What's the ob and clean function or method? This function clears the contents of the first output buffer and disables output buffering. If you want to process the contents of the buffer, you will need to call ob_getContents before using this function, because the buffer is destroyed by this method. It returns true on success or false in failure. The reasons for such a failure are that the output buffering may not be enabled. If the function fails, it generates an in-notice note. After that, we have also the ob and flush. The ob and flush method sends the contents of the output buffer and returns the value for the output buffering. If you want to continue manipulating the buffer, you can call ob get contents before ob and flush, but this function will already send the display to SAPI. This function is similar to ob get flush, except that ob get flush returns the buffer as a string. This function returns true on success or false on failure. The reasons for failure are that you may have called the function without having an active buffer. If the function fails, it issues an notice alert. Let's see how it works. So we have always a PHP file. I will use echo to print the value of the key username in the $_session array to the browser. But firstly, I will use ob start. When we use ob start, after that we use the echo. The output buffer will be opened by the key, will open the log and will store the value that we will display in the output buffer, which is username. So the value of the key username is username also in 8 octets or 8 bytes. Using firstly the ob and flush, the ob, which is output and output buffer, and the AND will change the boolean value of the output buffer to off, because the output buffer start will open it, will change the boolean value to on, and the ob AND will change it to off, will clean or will destroy the output buffer, and the flush will get the contents of the output buffer and sends it to the browser, and we will get the content of the output buffer in our page. But the ob and clean is the same thing. The AND will change the value or the boolean value of the output buffer to off also, so it will destroy the output buffer. It will do the contrary of the output buffer start method and will clean, will destroy the content, will empty the content of the output buffer. So it will clean or it will empty all the content of the output buffer. So the ob and clean will return the null, will return nothing here in the browser, but the ob and flush will get the content of the output buffer and will send it to the browser to be displayed here. This is the difference between the ob and clean and ob and flush. The two methods will empty the output buffer. After that, we have the ob get contents method. What's the ob get contents? This method returns the contents of the output buffer without erasing it or false if the output buffering is not enabled. If we want to display a character string, for example, but we have a session or a cookie, we will empty the buffer, but before we must first get the content of the string of character, and for that we use the function ob get contents. After that we have the ob get clean. The same thing is the get here. The ob get clean is the combination between the function ob get content and ob and clean. Thus, this function will first get the buffer contents and then finish the buffering session that was started by the ob start function. If a buffering or the buffer is not enabled, then false will be returned. Let's see how it works. So we have a PHP file. I will use echo to print always the key or the value of this key in the browser. We will use ob start to open the log and to start the session of the output buffer, and when we use echo after the ob start, we will get the value here in the output buffer. So when we use ob get contents, this function will get the content or all the value that we have stored in the output buffer. So it will return all the contents of the output buffer. It will return 8 bytes and it will display it in the browser. This is our browser, so we will get username here in our browser. When we use ob get clean, so the get will get the content of the output buffer, but clean will finish the session of the output buffer. So the ob get clean will also get the content of the output buffer, which is username. We'll send it to the browser. We will get this value in the browser, will display the value, then it will empty the value or the content of the output buffer. So the ob get content will empty the output buffer and will return firstly the username, which is the value in the output buffer. So at place of using ob get contents, after that ob and clean, we will use ob get clean directly. Let's now use a small example to understand it practically. So firstly, we will use ob start to start our output buffering session. So the ob start will start the session of the output buffer, will open the log as we have mentioned, will change the boolean value of the output buffer to on. Then I will use echo to print, for example, Alexander, and after that I will reload and see the results, and we have here Alexander. So the value has printed without any problem. If we use the ob get clean or the ob and clean firstly, so we will use this method. Let's reload and see the results, and we have nothing. Why? Because the output buffer and clean will empty the output buffer and will also return the null value. Now I will use the output and flash to see the difference between the and clean and end flash. Let's reload and see the results, and we have our results. Why? Because we have mentioned that the ob and flash will return the value or the content of the output buffer and will also empty the output buffer. We'll change the boolean value to off. After that, we have the ob get contents. Let's create a variable username. I will use ob get contents. So the content of the output buffering will be in the $username variable. Now I will use the ob and clean, and let's reload and see the results, and we have nothing. Now I will use echo after the output buffer is closed. I will use echo username. Let's reload and see the results, and we have Alexander. The example that I want to do is the user enter his username. I will create a new session with his username, and I will propose to him to change his username, and when he changes it, I will print the last username, and for that I need to get firstly the previous result, and I will print it using the output buffer. Let's do it. So I will open rc6.php. I have the username, so I have a form in the rc6. You have a form with the action php server php self to send the data in the same page, and the method is post. I have a label username and input with the name username. I will send this information to create a session. So I will check if I have a value for the key username in the $_post array. I will start the session, and I will create a new session with the value that the user entered here in the input, and for the username key in the $_session array, and I will propose to the user to change the username. After that, I will print a form with the action rc6.php, and the method is post with the label username and the input also username with the name username. So in this page, I will firstly use session start, and I will create a variable username. I will get the value from the $_session array, and before I will start the output buffering, I will use echo the username before edit it is username. And now I will use the session again, and by the method followed, the session and the cookie will be in the first of any page. And to use it in any place, I need to use the output buffer. So firstly, I will use the session, then I will print this sentence. So firstly, I will use $content variable to get the content of the output buffer, and I will use clean to empty the output buffer. Then I will use isSet if the post username that we have sent from the rc6.php page. I will get the new value because I proposed to the user to change his username. Then I will use echo to print the username. After edit it is the session, the new username, but the content is the previous username. Let's reload and see the results. And we have, for example, the username is Alexander. I will use send. I will change it to Maxim, or let's say Utopian. I will send, and I will see the username after edited is Utopian and the username before edited is Alexander. Why? Because we have the username after edit, it is the new username and the content here from the output buffering. So today we have learned what's the output buffering, the OB start, OB end clean, OB end flash, and OB get contents and OB get clean. Thank you for your watching.